I'm going to tell you all right now, I was really looking forward to getting this figure and excited to get her earlier than expected, and yeah, totally worth it. So what can be said about Studio Series 85 Arcee? It's a wonderful figure. I love this thing. As with Brawn and Ratchet, same rules apply. In the movie, they didn't design the vehicle modes, they just gave them robot modes, and so when they made the toys, they were just like, let's see what we can do. I don't necessarily think that Arcee ultimately beats out Ratchet as my personal favorite Studio Series Bumblebee figure, but she's pretty freaking close. The three-wheeled Cybertronian-ish motorcycle thing looks really cool. And from almost every angle, it doesn't necessarily look like it comes from a robot. When you get around to the back, if you know what you're looking for, the robot chest is just obviously right there. More than that, you've got the hands just sitting right there. And I feel like that's the only thing that really disappoints me about this vehicle mode, is the fact that the hands don't hide better. They might have been able to tuck into the forearms a little bit more, but because of the size of the parts, I think that may have been pushing it a little bit. Maybe they could have had the chest kind of hinge outward a little bit more to cover the fists, I don't know. As many people, including myself, have said many times about Cybertronian alt modes, it's not about hiding the robot. But overall, I really like this vehicle. The color breakup is really nice. I love the three-wheeled, technically four-wheeled motorcycle look and how the two wheels in the front kind of merge together. I really like the way that the color works here, how you've got the white from the legs right along the bottom of the alt mode with these little white bits picked out here and there to just kind of bring the color scheme together. And then of course predominantly you've got pink going along the top, which works just fine for me. And you also have yet another really nice example of deep blue for the windscreen. It's not quite as deep and rich as the blue that they used for Ratchet's windows, but it still looks pretty good and it works really nicely with the pink. This is the kind of shade of blue I wish that Ocular Max's Azalea alternative had, because that blue is just way too light. I feel like a darker blue like this would have contrasted so much better with the pink and white. But getting back to the look of the alt mode itself, there are some really nice molded details all over the thing, and it does a surprisingly great job of, as I mentioned before, hiding the robot, but also incorporating most of the robot into the vehicle mode. I suppose you could say about 2/3 of the pink section going along the top is backpack, as well as the wheel pods on the back. But I wouldn't really call this a shell form, because it incorporates the backpack into the alt mode, yes, like the backpack isn't the alt mode in its entirety. I also like that the weapon storage works both for weapon storage and to just kind of flesh out the details on the bike a little bit more, because they just peg onto the back and kind of look like exhausts. You can also plug them into the hands to kind of cover up the hands, but then I don't really like how close together that puts the guns. I think as exhausts, they look better spread out. In terms of size, the alt mode is kind of tiny deluxe size. She's probably one of the smaller Studio Series Bumblebee movie deluxes, at least of the ones I have, which admittedly is not many. I am kind of surprised, though, seeing her next to Brawn, at just how much smaller she looks than Brawn. Granted, her alt mode is longer than Brawn's, unless you have the drill attached to the end, but it just looks a little bit smaller. Not a problem. Just, it's a smaller deluxe, but I think for what you get, that's totally fine. There's a lot of complexity to the transformation that's actually really cool. There's some pretty decent paint on this thing. Overall, small for a deluxe, but that's kind of what we expect from the live-action Studio Series deluxes, right? And compared to other Arcees, you can see that she, funny enough, never seems to have quite the same shade of pink. It's similar to the Titan's Return version. It's probably as close as it's going to get, but it's interesting how different the colors are across the different Arcee figures that I have. And yes, I know there's Kingdom/Earthrise Arcee and G1 Studio Series Arcee that I don't have, but of the ones I've got, it's just interesting how they differ up the color scheme with the white and the pink. And also, totally not white and pink in terms of Prime Arcee. So this Arcee's transformation is really cool. It's ultimately very simple and very quick, but it is a lot of fun to do, and it accomplishes a lot with a little. It also does this fun thing where it works in chunks, where roughly half of the vehicle mode becomes the legs, and then the rest of it accordions up into the backpack and the torso. And aside from the robot mode head, you don't really get anything new revealed. And yeah, that backpack, I really like how the torso hinges down 90 degrees, and then the backpack accordions together and hinges in along with the head and the panel that the head sits on to fill all of that in, lock everything together. And the wheel covers that were covering up the forearms, but not the hands, in vehicle mode become Arcee's, let's say, iconic shoulder pod, back pod things, and they look the part. But then, like, the legs, they're very simple, but I like what they do. I like how the feet completely flip around and put the wheels at the back. And the wheels lock in so that you don't have to worry about them rolling while she's in robot mode, so they become stable heels. As weird as it is, I also think the way that the calves kind of open up and shift forward is kind of a cool touch. And as a bonus, it gives added leg articulation. And what all that leaves us with is a really nice live-action Bumblebee movie Arcee. I really like this figure. With one exception, I think it looks utterly amazing, and the colors are also great. It follows the mostly traditional G1 style Arcee color scheme, where it's mostly white in the legs, with a little bit of pink, and then mostly pink in the upper body with a little bit of white here and there, and then you also get some of this darker gray mixed in. I feel like if anyone is familiar with G1 Arcee but has no idea about the Bumblebee movie, if they look at this figure, they're gonna know it's supposed to be Arcee. There's no mistaking this. And I don't really know what else to say other than it just looks incredible. Like, the proportions are really nice. I like that they didn't get weird with it. That's owing to the live-action movie designs, but still, I appreciate that. And it's also cool how, aside from, I guess, the pelvis and the head, you don't really get any new details that are revealed in robot mode. It's all stuff that was there in one way or another. It's one of the reasons why the backpack is so small, ultimately. Granted, bigger than the backpack she had in the movie, because she didn't have one in the movie, but still, she cleans up really nice. And this is just a really cool looking figure. Now, getting into the head area, I'm going to talk about the minor issues I have with this toy. First two being those obvious rectangular hole covers that are in her torso. I don't mind that they're there, I just wish that the white that they had painted in was painted in as well as the white that they put on the rest of the torso, because it really does not incorporate very well. Like, it needed at least one more coat of white. It's not distracting, it's just a little disappointing. And then there is the head sculpt, which I'm warming up to it as time goes on, but I'm still not entirely here for it. It's a combination of elements. The texture on the face is a little bit too in keeping with the Michael Bay live-action movies, which I think I described before as mummy made out of pistons. It's just a little too textured for my liking, a little too much layering going on in the face sculpt. It is better than the overly busy nonsense from the movie itself, which we saw for all of like a few seconds, so it's not that big a deal regardless, but it's a little bit too creasy for my liking. Not saying her face needed to be, especially for a live-action movie, not saying it needed to be a smooth humanoid face or anything like that, but maybe take a little bit of the texture out, you know? The other thing that kind of throws me off about the head is her face is, I don't know, it looks really tiny in comparison to the rest of her head. It might just be the shape of the helmet, which admittedly the shape and texture on the helmet is great, as is the fact that they did the sort of regular rest of the robot body shade of pink for the sides of the little Princess Leia buns that she has, and then a lighter pink for the face itself. And they also painted in the eyes, which looks great, and a little dot of silver on that deco on the forehead crest thing. The sculpt of the helmet, the shape of the helmet, the coloring and all that is great. It's just, it looks like it's a little bit too big for her head. It either makes it look like she has a really tiny face or a really large head behind a really tiny face. And again, it's not too egregious, especially considering the fact that the figure itself isn't that big, so, you know, looking at her on the shelf, you don't really notice. But when the focus is on the figure up close, it seems a little off. But that's really the worst I can come up with for this figure. I actually absolutely adore this figure, and am glad I got her when I did. Now for her articulation, the head is on a ball joint, so you get a tiny bit of wiggling back and forth, which it's not the best, but it's there. You get a pretty decent amount of looking up and down though, so that's good, I appreciate that. And then of course you can look left and right. The shoulders can do a full 360 rotation in theory, but the arms are going to knock into the backpack kibble, but really I think the amount of range you get before that happens is perfectly fine. The arms can also go out slightly past 90, which is great. Get a bicep swivel, You get a double jointed elbow that can bend a full 180 degrees. I love that. You also get a waist swivel, which when I first got the figure, waist swivel on mine was really loose, so I tightened it up a little bit, and now it's fine. The hips can go forward and backward to 90, can go out practically 90. You get a pretty decent thigh swivel. Unfortunately, you only get 90 degrees of knee bend. That's a little disappointing, but I do think it's kind of cool how this knee pad thing stays with the lower leg and just kind of, if you're looking at it from the front at least, hides some of that joint on the knee. As part of the transformation, you also get that forward and backward motion on the calf. And then of course you get ankle tilts, which can go past 90 as part of the transformation because of how you need to move it out of the way to transform the wheel section. So yeah, this is a pretty spectacularly posable little figure. And the shoulder pods are on ball joints, so you can move them around, and then they're also mushroom peg sections for some reason, so you can swivel them too. So you can position the shoulder pods in a number of different ways. I do kind of wish that the shoulder pods could lock in at least one position other than for vehicle mode, but they hold their position just fine. They're not loose or anything like that, but it is easy to knock them out of place when you grab the figure. But then the flip side of that is it gives you a lot of versatility in how you arrange them. So if you want to tuck them close to the back and really tighten up that backpack, you can do that. If you want to flare them out a little bit, you can do that. If you want to flare them out a lot, you can do that. If you want to have them posed up over the shoulders, you can do that too. So yeah, I love the versatility on the backpack. As for her accessories, she has a pair of little pistols, and they look fine. They are unpainted, which I'm totally fine with. I am of the opinion that if it comes down to putting paint on the accessories or putting paint on the robot, put paint on the robot. That being said, they work just fine in the dark gray that they're cast in. I kind of like that they're these long-barreled pistols too. That makes them look more threatening for some reason. And of course, you can peg them into her fists if you want. You can also peg them back onto the back pods if you want to store them how they were stored in vehicle mode. The thing that disappoints me about this, though, and I feel like there might have been a way to figure this out, is you can't attach them to her hips. And I know this is just me being spoiled in terms of other Arcee figures, but I've kind of gotten used to Arcee figures that have an option to plug her guns onto her hips like holsters, and not having it here is just a little disappointing. Like, there are peg holes in the sides of the hips for where the back pods plug in for vehicle mode, so maybe they didn't think they had room, but I feel like maybe they could have put tabs on like the sides of the guns, but then maybe they would have had to do the molds differently. I don't know. I wish there was a way to plug the guns into the hips for storage, but there isn't. That said, they look pretty freaking cool in her hands, so just leave them there. And I love this figure. I love the look of this figure. I love the articulation. I love the transformation. I don't want to get ahead of myself and say that this feels like a Movieverse figure that won't need repro labels, because I didn't think that Ratchet needed repro labels, but I got the set for him and they look amazing, so I kind of feel like this figure is great. Maybe they'll do a repro label set and that'll make it even more amazing. We'll just have to wait and see. But right now, I'm content with how the figure looks without adding any extra detail. Not saying I wouldn't do more in the future, but what you get out of the box I think is really freaking cool. Now, the size stuff. Once again, this is a relatively tiny deluxe. It's not like Earthrise Cliffjumper tiny, but it is on the short side. That being said, as I said before, I'm totally fine with that. I feel like the amount of stuff you get with this figure in terms of the detailing, the engineering, and overall the paint, which is admittedly a little sparse, but like the color separation is so nice you don't really notice. I feel like it's fine. It works. It's worth it. She is definitely the shortest Arcee I have, at least currently, but doesn't make her the worst. I mean, I don't think there is a single Arcee that I own that I would call bad in any way, but she is objectively the shortest of them all, for whatever that's worth. But again, it's fine. I'm totally fine with the size because it's just a really cool figure, and I still think it's worth the money, even if it's a little short. And that is going to do it for Studio Series 85 Bumblebee Movie Arcee. Can you tell I really like this figure? As I said with the Studio Series Bumblebee Movie Ratchet figure before, I kinda hope a knockoff company does an oversized, slightly re-engineered, and painted to the nines version of this figure, because I love the figure enough that I will totally get another version of it. And it's just cool. I want to see what else someone might be able to do with this as a sort of skeleton. I'm also curious to see if they do any kind of remolding stuff with this, because that could be interesting. Like maybe give us a chromia? I'd probably buy it. But that is enough speculation on my part. I feel like I've said enough. So, what do you all think of Studio Series 85 RC? Whatever your thoughts, feel free to chime in down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all. Thank you everybody for watching, and remember, art is more than meets the eye.